Geert Lovink. Perhaps before I introduce the biography, a bit of a personal note. From the early 1990s in Central and Eastern Europe, Geert Lovink has been the most followed theorist and activist one can probably imagine. And the reason for this was, of course, in the year 1989, which has kind of catapulted artists and intellectuals from former communist countries onto the international scene. The mood was kind of complex and complicated. It was a mood of being second-hand citizens in a way in that kind of international arena, and was kind of self-colonizing mood. However, there was one terrain that somehow introduced a same starting point for artists and intellectuals in both the West and the East of Europe, and that was the internet. In 1989, March 1989, I believe, by means of HTML and HTTP, the internet was offered for individual use, and artists and intellectuals in Central and Eastern Europe thought, this is our opportunity, this is the occasion to kind of enter the field of artistic production from the same starting line as the artists and intellectuals from the so-called West. And indeed, the name of Geert and his practices, his writings, his activism, and his kind of involving terrains, conceptual and geopolitical terrains of former communist countries has been of crucial importance. Media theorist, internet critic, and author of Zero Comments from 2007, and Networks Without a Cost, 2012. Since 2004, he's a researcher in the School for Communication and Media Design at the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences, where he's a founding director of the Institute of Network Cultures. His center organizes conferences, publications, and research networks such as Video Vortex, the Politics and Aesthetics of Online Video, Unlike Us, Alternatives in Social Media, Critical Point of View, Wikipedia, Society of the Query, The Culture of Research, Money Lab, Bitcoins, crowdfunding, and Internet revenue models. He's also professor at the European Graduate School, where he supervises PhD students, and an advisory board member of the Digital Ethnography Research Center in Melbourne. Geert, thank you very much for joining us. The floor is yours.
Welcome. Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here, and I'm really looking forward to the debates. And let me start with. I would like to really start off with the year 2011. Of course, there are many beginnings here. I'm very honored that, Maria, you mentioned my involvement in the early 90s in Central and Eastern Europe. That's certainly another beginning, and it's the beginning of a lot of media activism, internet activism, at the crossroads of the arts. But certainly, when we're talking about strategies today for digital media, I think 2011 is very important. Of course, starting off with Tunisia, then Egypt. Then the movement of the squares and Occupy. And of course that then after that continues and spreads. The models are spreading, and that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit more. But of course also the political agendas have become quite diversified, to put it mildly. I think of Maidan, which I think is an event, that has not yet really fully been processed, especially here in Europe. All the events in Ukraine, we're really puzzled by it. Are we really involved? Do we really take a position there? But also think this year of Hong Kong, a huge event of its kind, very, very important for the Asian context. There's a lot of material out there that needs to be analyzed and looked at, which are kind of actual manifestations of contemporary social movement. But of course, in my field, this is a central question, right? This starts off in Tunisia and then in Egypt. Is the so-called Facebook revolution, and I think this book by Linda Herrera is really good because she spent 17 years there, she lived there, and she was there, in fact, during the event, and this year this account of her came out. And if you read it, it really makes you quite humble and reluctant to speak about, a Facebook revolution, etc. Right? We know that, but this is, of course, still a question of our time. How do these technologies, how do these architectures really interfere with the events and with the political? These two I also find very interesting. They less focus on the so-called social media question, and they approach it, let's say, from the other perspective. Now, I don't want to condemn anyone here of being offline romantics, but a lot of the literature that especially comes from the activist field really goes deep into the question of the role of, let's say, anarchism or rather ancient questions. And these books too somehow, in my opinion, kind of shy away from this question: how the virtual and the real, how the event and the network really mingle, if they do or not. Anyway, these books are very good accounts of what happened. Especially They Can't Represent Us is a book that really takes you across the globe, which I think is a very, very good perspective, mainly coming from Latin America, showing that all these experiments of these social media are coming a long way, and in fact, go back to the 80s and 90s. David Graeber, in his book, he didn't want, of course, to write or be known as the historian of the New York Occupy movement, so he shies away from that in a somewhat strange way, but it's very, very interesting nonetheless, because he's an important person, and I'm a big fan of his work. So this book that he wrote about it certainly contains a lot of kind of important concepts and experiences and reflections, very fresh, of course, written 1 or 2 years after the event. During the same year, in 2011, we in Amsterdam started the Unlike Us network, which kind of approached the question from the other side. So the starting point here is, if these social media are important, how can we analyze these new monopolies? Why are people attracted to them? What does it mean if we scale up? What is the network effect exactly? How do these almost natural monopolies that we all support come into being without us even really noticing? So one day we wake up and we find out that this startup had become a monopoly. Some people support that, others like Peter Thiel, he supports the monopoly idea, very interesting approach in my view. Others, coming from Brussels, of course, 5-10 years later, come in and say, no, that's not possible. Here, we in Europe, we can't have, American monopolies, that's not possible. So they call for regulation. That's approximately where we are. But our point of view there was, it's one thing to critique that, but do we really have alternatives? What if we want decentralized social media? What are our concepts? And we know from software development that it all starts with concepts, right? That's why we are here. That's why we speculate. That's why we think up, because ideas have consequences, and they have consequences in the software industry. And we know there is a direct link between us, between Buck here, and Microsoft, Google, Facebook there, right? We are directly linked. There's a direct link between Buck and Google, right? Let's not presume that it's different. Unfortunately, you don't get their profits, but that's another. Conceptually. Ideas are dangerous. Ideas have consequences. If we discuss them, right, they will materialize. And that's why we organize all this stuff, right? Because ideas matter. So the question with social media really is, one, if we want these different social media, on what ideas are they based? That was the principal question. The network is still running, doing fine. Some of our projects die, or they don't get any more funding, and it all gets very desperate. But this one is still kind of relevant for the simple question, that. Social media are becoming, such an intimate part of the everyday life for billions of people, literally billions of people, that this question cannot just be, moved from the table and say, well, we move on and we've dealt with the social media and let's now talk about something else. No, the social media are really with us to stay. So the challenge that is out there, to think those alternative architectures is really tremendous. On the 23rd, finally, also, we've made some attempts to reach the Dutch mainstream. The Unlike Us thing is, it's relatively small. I don't want to, over-marginalize my own work, but if you're talking about a few thousand people. In the internet context, that's nothing. That's nothing, right? So we are really trying hard to find new majorities, new ways of addressing this. And the Stad Schouwburg in Amsterdam was somehow, I don't know why, but they were suddenly very interested in alternatives to the existing social media platforms, and they came up with this, and together with Waag Society, we are now hosting this large event in the National Theatre in Amsterdam, which, for us is meaningful because it brings our work to an entire new level, right? Maybe a little bit away from the artists and the software developers and academics, researchers, to the Dutch mainstream. If you get a call from the Telegraaf, then you know that, that just doesn't happen every day. So this is interesting for us. The same is done from Breda, from the Museum of the Image, from Moti. This initiative in Nederland and Vlaanderen to host a crypto challenge, and I think this is a very, very important next step post-Snowden to put the question on the table: why did so far our alternative models in social media fail? What happened post-Snowden, and what does it mean if we have to add this additional layer to all our decentralized utopian ideas, namely that of secure communication? And that is a really, really difficult one. Post-Snowden, now 2 years into that, this is a very, very tough one. I'm really, really happy about it. It's a broad coalition of about 30 schools and primarily design schools, art institutions, researchers, to put on the agenda not only the awareness that we need to take the security of our communication in our own hands because others will not do it for us, but also to emphasize that one of the big problems the earlier engineers, etc., geeks, programmers ran into was the failing, let's say, graphic user interface, the failing interface culture, right? All the code was right, but it didn't work and it looked ugly, so no one used it. Yeah, we all know that, and this is kind of still where we are. So to interface between the technical world and the world of the arts and design remains an enormous challenge, and I think one also where the Netherlands has to play an important role. We are obliged to do that because we have the whole kind of also educational and art design infrastructure here to take on this quite difficult task. And I would say reworking is also very, very important for me. The anonymous movement, the anonymous groups, their hacks is very, very important in that context. Of course, it happened at the same time as 2011. This movement also grew from that. And maybe you have seen it, but Gabriella Coleman has written this fantastic history of the anonymous movement. Came out in November, and it's a very, very good, but also, of course, incredibly tragic account of this movement, of the betrayals, of its heroic days, but also of the, there's about 40 people in jail at the moment, long-term sentences. So there's an enormous amount that we can learn, in my view, from, what went wrong there, and maybe also what was right? And the way Anonymous kind of renegotiated, with pop culture is an interesting one. And the optimistic energy they had, they were somehow also defying all the fears that no one can communicate anymore safely, and there's a real existing problem there. If you want to communicate securely these days, the chances are very big that you stop communicating altogether, because you find out that it really doesn't work. So so that's the anonymous movement, and connected to that, I find in the arts, is the whole movement and experimentation with masks, which I find really, of course, on the one hand, it's playful and innocent, but if you read a little bit into it, and it's very, very powerful in terms of the construction of new, forms of imagination that speak to large amounts of people, right? Because a lot of people, and especially young people, can relate to this and can understand why this is important, and how we should approach this. I think there's an enormous body of work done by artists in this field. Zach Blas is, for me, is one of the more radical and more interesting ones. So these informationally opaque masks, which you know, are kind of, and this is maybe where I interface with the post-human in a narrow sense, maybe, as you are discussing it here, because these masks are really designed not to be read by the algorithms of the visual software, and so that is that's an important aspect. But I also find, I recently last week I came across this image, and that is the opposite side of it. And it's very, very important, because this is the woman who reaches, who escapes IS territory in Syria, and she and her family, they are reaching, liberated territory, and she throws off her burqa. And I think that energy is as important for me, because we know that crypto and protection might be important, but the energy, the liberation, the desire to throw it off, to throw off the mask, is as important, because to further enter the regime of paranoia is killing, right? So I understand sometimes it's important to enter the tunnel, but if there is no light at the end of the tunnel, right, this is no option for me. So it has to be part of our tactics. It has to be a technique, right? And it can never be a religion or an end point, for that matter. Because also we know, and this is why in our field it's also important to understand that we need the masks, but we also need to unveil ourselves. And there, of course, we then immediately start to interface with this algorithmic reality. These are the experiments done to read the emotional, the affect phase, the political messages of the faces of the masses, right? This is the current software that is being installed by the the surveillance regimes, and they are reading, is this guy really outraged? Is he happy? What is the mood of the masses, right? And so this is happening simultaneously, of course, and of course that's also why some people say, well, we need to protect ourselves because we don't want to be read in such a way when we go in public. I want to now switch to another debate of the activist strategies, because that's equally important, and that's the question of organization, right? There's the question of networking and how we organize our internal and external communication, but the question of organization these days is intimately entangled with the question of the network and the question of the organization. And of course, we've seen a whole group of scholars, again, not innocent or marginal scholars, in my point of view. Think of, this is Jody Dean's book, but think of Badiou, Zizek. There's so many more people who have made a strong argument that we should try to overcome the weaknesses and the temporarity of the social movements, and that we should organize ourselves in a form of a political party, right? And that's of course has been happening, and as we know, there's now Syriza, there's Podemos, but of course before that we already had the Green parties, we had the Linke, we had the SP here in the Netherlands. This has been around with us, well, maybe already for a good 150 years. If you're an anarchist, you will know that this is the old question, right? There's nothing new about this. But you know, it's very, very contemporary, and yeah, this was posted yesterday, I think, on the NetTime mailing list. But yeah, this is an important piece, an internal debate coming from Spain, precisely about this question, right? This is it's quite devastating piece by Simona. I don't know if you know her, but she was here recently. She's an Italian living in Barcelona and organizer of the Free Culture movement and Free Culture Forum, sorry. And she's quite an influential figure in Barcelona. And in this piece, she describes how Podemos has, you know, kind of incorporated and violated also the history of the 15M Indignados movement. And here you can really see, you know, how in today's debates, these three entities start to relate to each other, right? There is the social movement, the social media, and then the political party, and this is kind of you know, where, in my view, the big debate is, and that is happening primarily in Spain. So how the renegotiation between these three things. Yeah, Spain is and has been since for at least 5 years been the most lively place, you know, for debates, how these three entities relate to each other. And this discussion piece by Simona is a very interesting one because, yeah, it contains also a lot of kind of compromising material against Podemos, how they, you know, put people on their candidature lists without them even being a member of the party, etc., etc. Right? So the tension there is really existing, and the choices that need to be made are very, very real, and we see that in Greece too. But we also see other things happening, and I really want to go back to this maybe a bit unusual example, but important in our context, for the new media context, and a very important case study. And this is the experience of the pirate parties, especially, of course, Sweden, but the one in Germany is and was at least big at the time, let's say 2-3 years ago. And why that this is interesting in this context is because they were the first one who said, you know, we want to have a form of direct democracy that is also part of our internal party life, and that form of direct democracy and a new form of decision making. For us, will have a technological expression, right? And this is, I think, also one of the yet unresolved, let's say, controversies or differences that are out there, where we see, of course, you know, the kind of offline faction and the online faction, not yet really coming together, where the activists are primarily on the side of the offline experience. This experience, by the way, there's a woman in Essen, Anja Adler, who has just written her PhD about this experiment. The experiment in the pirate parties of Germany was called Liquid Feedback. So that was the name of the software. And the concept was called Liquid Democracy. And I find it really, really interesting. We should further look into this. Because the decision-making of the future will have a technological component in one way or another, right? And it is up to us to experiment with this and to look, because the real and the virtual, the offline and the online are entangled. So we cannot walk away from that. And that's also my message, more or less, in relation to Judith Butler and her new book, which is kind of has the immediate danger of being marginalized, only referring to the offline and kind of celebrating the offline. And I'm really looking forward to this. It's very, very important to further theorize the theory of the General Assembly in the way she does it here. The concepts of her are, maybe you're familiar with it, performality and Beyond Speech Act, etc. Right? This is how she understands the General Assembly. And I think from our perspective, we need to bring in there also the virtual aspect, because people organize themselves and are part of decision-making processes using computers, smartphones, etc. all the time, even here in this room. Yeah? We cannot deny the reality of that is happening in this room alone. So why should we say the General Assembly is a kind of a unique offline spectacle? No, I don't believe that. I'm curious to read this book. This book is not yet out. But the blurb says that she wants to include forms of long-distance solidarity, which is interesting, but also a little bit, secondary, because in my view, the virtual is not an expression of solidarity. The virtual is much, much more, and there's tough fights going on there, and it's a battle arena in and for itself. It's not only a vehicle for solidarity in that sense. I've made recently also experiences myself in Rethink UvA with the whole General Assembly model, and we've tried and are still trying in the Rethink UvA experience to further bring together the offline and the offline ways of decision making and work groups. Coordination, where coordination and decision making are further integrated instead of separated, because this is kind of the immediate danger that we have. But this is an example here from the Netherlands, ongoing, as you know. It's also an interesting case. Okay, I'm coming to a close. This is my thesis for today. Social movements today face a fundamental lack of time to let events unfold to their true potential, and the self-organization skills to execute their own decisions, right? So everyone who has been in social movements and who has made these enormous, overwhelming events will know that it's wonderful if it lasts 2 days. Sometimes it even lasts less. So there's an enormous compression of time happening there, and social movements are really, really almost not allowed anymore to unfold themselves in time. And this is, of course, why then the political party, as a model, comes in and says, "Yeah, you social movement, you will have the event, you will do maybe the spectacle, but we will guarantee the sustainable representation of your demands over time." Right? So, there is that immediate problem. And that's why my call is movements need to start thinking long-term, beyond the real-time mobilizations, because this is what the social media do so well. They organize in a very, very short amount of time. They can mobilize a lot of people, thousands, maybe more, and build their own digital and material infrastructure, including alternative social media platforms, with or without crypto. And this is, in my view, an urgent one. Together with Ned Rossiter in Sydney, I'm still working on this idea and this concept of organized networks in a response to the exploitation of the weak links between people. So the network effect is very, very good at exploiting, I would say, exploring. Yeah, it's of course both of the weak link, and in my view, from a social media and social movement perspective, the big mystery that is still out there is how we want to organize the strong links, how we want to strengthen the links that we have, and this. Also has a very, very practical, let's say, software component, because the social media can grow very, very fast, but we know that the toughness of the real work done in the work groups, etc., done on the forum sites, etc., is the real challenge that is ahead of us. It's not only the mobilizations towards the event. And in technical terms, in more network theory terms, let's say, it is the challenge, it's the promise that is out there to go beyond, let's say, this Paul Barron model, already from the early 60s, because one of the problems with these different forms of networks has been so far that B and C have led to A, so that we are still preaching as if the internet is decentralized or distributed, but that we ended up in a centralized system. And this is kind of a yet unprocessed, maybe not traumatic event, but it could very, very well be that if we are not going through this, if we are not rethinking and thinking through what's happening here, we can also already see that the network form itself will be on its way out. Very simple. It will be overruled by events, it will be overruled by the party, it will be overruled by all sorts of new formalized forms, centralized forms of power, right? And so that the whole dream of, let's say, read Alex Galloway's Protocol book. It's kind of a dream book for me, where it's kind of dreaming of a world, that no longer exists. And the moment the book came out, of course, after 9/11, a new reality set in, and we are now living in that new post-11, post-Snowden environment where, the idea of how power is structured, after its decentralization sounds like, what are you talking about? Decentralization? That's really not what's at stake. But for me, the utopian energy is still there, and people are not giving up, and for me, designing new federated systems, is really a challenge for me. And I'm really, because we are here with theorists and we are devoted to speculation, I really would love to see more people come on board, because there's a real big cry for us, you know, to further theorize federation. What is federation? What could it be? Because federation could give a possible answer to the problems that I sketched out earlier, namely that the decentralized ideology has led to a new form of centralization. How can we deal with that, and could the federation model be a way out? Okay, thank you very much.